everybody. Welcome to an emergency podcast edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, and now TikTok at Hawk Blogger. And hello to the folks that are joining on TikTok, as I am live there as well for this episode. And this is kind of a sad day, I would say, as a Seahawks fan or just as a human being. Ryan Grubb fired after just one season as the offensive coordinator for your Seattle Seahawks, and came to Seattle, to the Seahawks, with a lot of fanfare. I still remember doing an emergency pod just like this one less than a year ago when Mike Macdonald was filmed in Dino's pub right near the VMAC with, I think it was John Schneider and Ryan Grubb and maybe the linebackers coach, I can't remember the fourth guy, by UW commenter, who did a little drive-by with his cell phone and caught images of Ryan Grubb. Ryan Grubb had been just a week earlier talking to the University of Alabama boosters and telling them that he was their offensive coordinator. And there was concern that the Seahawks had missed their chance to bring in Ryan Grubb. And when it became a reality that Ryan Grubb was going to be a Seahawk and the Seahawks offensive coordinator, the first offensive coordinator for Mike Macdonald, it felt like a huge celebration. It felt like everything was possible. It felt like you had an innovator on defense in Mike Macdonald, who was viewed as maybe the best defensive coach in football at the time. And then you had the best offensive play caller in college getting his first crack at the NFL. And you'd hope that he would bring some innovation and some fresh life to an offense that had a lot of the same pieces that his Washington offense had. It had a quarterback that could make all the throws. Geno Smith and Michael Penix Jr. are able to attack all parts of the field and have incredibly accurate arms. You had a trio of wide receivers, just the same way that they had a trio of wide receivers at University of Washington that could attack the field in all sorts of ways. In addition to that, you had more than you had at University of Washington, in that you had two, what you hope to be, high-level running backs in Kenneth Walker III and Zach Charbonnet. And you put that together with Noah Fant, who was a higher-level athlete at tight end than, as much as Jack Westover was a playmaker at University of Washington, Noah Fant had a first-round pedigree. There was reason to be really hopeful that the Seahawks offense could really take off. And then even during the season, over the first few games of the season, there was the second half against the Broncos in week 1, where you had Ryan Grubb turn to the running game. And the reason the Seahawks won that game is because they were able to run the ball down the Broncos' throats. And that was the big question. Could Ryan Grubb actually adjust to the NFL and get into the run game? And they sure did in the first game of the season. And then in week 2, you saw them flex to when they were facing the New England Patriots. Patriots played a lot of man. They were trying to take away the run game, and you saw them spread it out. You saw them get the ball out to Jackson Smith-Njigba, who blew up in that game, was a key part of it. Both JSN and DK Metcalf go for over 100 yards. They go for, I think both of them might have had 10 receptions. I mean, it was a huge passing game in that one, and Geno Smith was distributing it all over the place. And even in week 3 against the Miami Dolphins, they start off with 17 points in the first quarter. DK Metcalf goes over the top for a big touchdown. You saw the explosiveness. You heard about that from the players throughout training camp, that this was something that Ryan Grubb was going to bring to the table, was the fact that he was going to have an explosive offense. And from there, you got into the Detroit game. It didn't even end there, if we're being honest. They go 3-0 into Detroit. And the defense was the one that didn't show up. Mike Macdonald's defense was nowhere to be found in that game in Detroit. They had a lot of injuries. We won't talk about that and all those things, but the offense never blinked. You saw creativity from Ryan Grubb. You saw him pull out for the first time, and ended up being the first of 2 times, where he called on a 3rd down play, a pass to Jackson Smith-Njigba, who then lateraled it across the field to Zach Charbonnet to pick up a key first down. You saw them put up over 500 yards of offense against what was one of the best defenses in the NFL that had their guys at that time. They were not nearly as injured as they are now in the Detroit Lions. You saw them really go toe-to-toe with the Lions' heralded offense in that game, and yet it wasn't enough. And so I'm going to play some sound for you that, for me, helped clue me into why, if you've been following my show, if you've been following my blog over at hawkblogger.com, this is not a huge surprise that this move was made. I've been talking about this for a very long time. And I'm going to play a few of the clips from Mike Macdonald, from Ryan Grubb, that helped really solidify my perspective that this was just a mismatch. It was not a situation, and I want to take this right at the top. I'm seeing people say, man, it's not fair that Ryan Grubb was fired. Like, you got to give him a chance to adjust. I'm seeing people say that this is an offensive line issue. This isn't a Ryan Grubb issue. I'm seeing people say this is a John Schneider issue because the offensive line wasn't built properly. I'm seeing a bunch of people talk about this being a performance-based decision. That's incorrect. Mike Macdonald said it on his show this morning. I am telling you right now, all the indicators I've seen, all the things I've heard, are that this was not about whether Ryan Grubb is a good offensive coordinator or whether the offense had a chance to be much better next year. If he had another year, would he be a better offensive coordinator? Would the offense take a step forward? Of course. I think there's a very good reason to expect all that to be true. The reason this decision was made was because the head coach, Mike Macdonald, and the offensive coordinator, Ryan Grubb, do not share the same fundamental philosophies about how they want to operate. That's what it is. So you're going to hear a lot of folks talk about, well, what did you expect Ryan Grubb to do because of this and that? And what did you expect? Like, it's not fair that this happened, or that any college coach is going to take some time to adjust. Those things are all true. They're also all totally and completely irrelevant. This is not a performance-based decision. And as a leader for Mike Macdonald, you can grow people. You can work with people. You can help them take steps forward to become their full potential selves. That's what you do with players. You have to do that with coaches. You heard Mike Macdonald talk about putting people around Ryan Grubb to help him adjust to the NFL and learn what was going on in the NFL. We'll talk about some of those things here as well. But what you can't really do is help change somebody's worldview. You cannot change their fundamental perspective on how to approach their job. Maybe you can, but it's a lot of hard work and it's a huge risk. And one of the truisms I've found over the years, both in managing people as well as building products, is changing people's behavior, changing like the fundamentals of who they are and how they operate. Good luck, man. That is not, that is what they call tilting at a windmill. It is just not a good bet to make. So Mike Macdonald made a different choice. Mike Macdonald made a choice to say, you know what? Instead of trying to throw good years after bad instead of trying to what is essentially double down on a decision that he already had a pretty good idea was not the right one, Mike Macdonald said, this isn't going to work. We're going to go back. I'm going to take advantage this time of being able to take my time. He's not going to be slow about it, but he's going to be able to do a bit of a broader search. He's going to be able to talk to more people. Keep in mind, when Mike Macdonald got hired, he was one of the last coaching hires at the time. This was after the NFC Championship, right? When he lost. So that's how much further into the offseason they already were. A lot of coaches were already hired. A lot of staffs were already locked in. He's going to get an opportunity now to actually talk to some folks, have multiple choices. At this point, I think he didn't have, or at this point last year, I don't think he had a lot of choices to choose from. So now you're going to get Mike Macdonald saying, okay, this wasn't it, but now I have a better idea of what I want, and I'm going to find that person. You heard him today on the Brock and Salk show say they are going to talk to people. They're not just going to hand this over to Jake Peetz, would be the obvious one, who's in-house. You'll hear Mike Macdonald talk about him in a second when I play some sound from Mike Macdonald. They are going to cast a wide net, so to speak. So this is an opportunity for Mike Macdonald to frankly do what Pete Carroll did after his first year. Pete Carroll was much more experienced than Mike Macdonald. He had a much, much broader Rolodex of coaches to talk to. He chose to bring Jeremy Bates with him from USC to be his offensive coordinator in the first year. What did we hear from Pete Carroll from the very first time he came to Seattle? He talked about the circle of toughness. He talked about always compete. He talked about how the running game completed the circle of toughness. What did Jeremy Bates do in that first season? 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, throwing deep fade routes. He did things that were antithetical to Pete Carroll's philosophy. And Pete decided at that point, this isn't going to work for me. Even though he had already actually coached with Jeremy Bates before he came to Seattle. So he had an advantage Mike Macdonald didn't. And yet he still decided after 1 year, not going to work. Not going to do this. So, excuse me. So he moved on. He ended up hiring Darrell Bevell. And that worked out pretty well for him, other than the second Super Bowl. But in general, it worked out pretty well for him. And so I think that before people jump to this conclusion that Mike Macdonald isn't being fair or that he's too harsh, I actually think there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of optimism in this decision, because Mike Macdonald's not going to get an endless amount of rope. Nobody does. And if you're going to go down, you better go down with the people that you believe are the right ones for what you're trying to do. He does not owe Ryan Grubb anything other than the opportunity that he gave him this year. They learned about each other. And the other thing I'd put out there is, I wouldn't assume that Ryan Grubb wanted to come back. I'll play some sound for you in a second from Ryan Grubb. You'll hear some of his conversation, how he's talked about working with Mike and working on a staff that is primarily defense oriented. I'm not sure it was a great fit from Ryan Grubb's perspective either. So I'm going to play a couple sounds about that, but let me get some other information out there. So I heard a couple other things in the Mike Macdonald press conference or Mike Macdonald show with Brock and Salk this morning that I interpreted a little bit differently than others. And this is my interpretation. I haven't followed up with Mike Macdonald. I don't have any additional details. I do feel like I've got a decent feel for his intonation and his delivery. And the first thing was he was asked about Scott Huff. Scott Huff came here as part of the Ryan Grubb hiring. They worked together at University of Washington. They were going to go to Alabama together. They came to Seattle together. He was asked whether or not Scott Huff is still, tied with Ryan Grubb or whether he's going to stay in Seattle. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but Mike Macdonald essentially said, that's still being decided. He said that they did come here as a pair, but that Scott Huff is a Seahawk now, and that decision is still under consideration. And so what do we know from that? He did not say Ryan Grubb's gone. He did not say Scott Huff is gone. So he hasn't fired Scott Huff. If he intended to fire Scott Huff, he would have already done it. The implication there is there's more conversations to be had. It also, to me, does not mean that he is back for sure. I think that what it means is that two things are true. One, Scott Huff did enough this year to keep Mike Macdonald open to the idea of him being the long-term answer as the offensive line coach. If he hadn't, he would have already been gone. So he's seen something different from Scott Huff than he saw from Ryan Grubb. The other thing is that they're going to hire a new OC. And Mike Macdonald does not yet know who that person is and does not yet know whether or not that person is going to want their own offensive line coach. If that person has an offensive philosophy that lines up well with how Scott Huff coaches offensive linemen. Does not know if that person if that person's open to working with Scott Huff. When they talk, is there good chemistry? Do they want to work together? He also doesn't know if Scott Huff's going to get other offers, maybe wherever Ryan Grubb goes, maybe from someplace else, and maybe Scott Huff will choose to leave. All those things are open. Mike Macdonald does not need to commit to any of them right now, but the news of this is that he was not fired. So Scott Huff is still available to the Seahawks, at least as of now. Sorry, I've got an itchy nose. And time will tell. So that is not, I've heard people characterize it as Scott Huff is staying. That is well premature from my perspective. There's no guarantee that Scott Huff is staying for a number of reasons. I also do not think it's clear that he's going. So I just think that we don't know enough yet. The other thing that I heard was a Geno Smith comment. And there was a question of, do you think Geno Smith is going to be your quarterback next year? And Mike Macdonald said something along the lines of, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't be. So yeah. And people are taking the text, I think, out of context, without tone, and without listening to all the other press conferences and Brock and Salk shows that Mike Macdonald's done this year. What I've heard from Mike Macdonald in that response was, you're asking a question I think the answer is very obvious to, so I'm going to be kind of flippant about it. I think the implication I got from that was that obviously he's going to be back next year. Now, that was my interpretation of his answer. I do not believe that that guarantees that Geno Smith's going to be back. So two different things. I don't think, even if Mike Macdonald knew that Geno Smith was not going to be back, he wouldn't say anything about it. And he's going to leave open possibilities of all sorts of things happening between now and next season. That's normal. So I don't think there was anything in that answer that was newsworthy. I don't think there was anything in that answer about Geno Smith that really tips their hand one way or another. There are other people that are taking that as, man, he really doesn't sound like he's into Geno Smith. That's just not the case. That was not the way he answered that question. That's not consistent with the way he's answered similar questions throughout the year. So those are two things that I just wanted to get off from the very get-go. But now let's get to it. I'm going to play some sound from Mike Macdonald a couple times from this season that stood out to me, and helped me, kind of got my attention about his perspective on Ryan Grubb. And for folks that are tuning in on TikTok, I want to, first of all, double check that this is actually working properly. Hold on one second, folks. Let's get this going again. So apologies if somebody was on TikTok, but this is the bonus of doing 2 shows at once. Okay. Hopefully that works. Okay. So we are now live. I'm going to play some sound from Mike Macdonald and about why, some things that clued me in. Hopefully people on TikTok will be able to hear this. I unfortunately cannot stream directly to TikTok, so you're going to have to hear via my phone this sound that I'm going to play, and hopefully everybody else can hear it. Everybody on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you all hear it just fine. This was a question that I asked Mike Macdonald after the Patriots game. This was after week 2. And this was I thought, a rather innocuous kind of question. They were 2-0. People were feeling good. And I phrased it the wrong way. I said something along the lines, and I think you'll hear it in this, my tail end of the question, basically handing over a third of the team to a college OC. What made him confident in handing over, or being in charge, I think was the word I used, the phrase, putting someone else in charge of a third of the team, a third being offense, defense, special teams is a third. And Mike Macdonald's response caught my attention. Here's what he said.
I don't see that he's in charge. I mean, who's in charge of what? It's like, that's kind of a weird way of describing it in my mind. We have a lot of coaches on offense that have a ton of NFL experience. Leslie spends a lot of time over there. I can go right down the line of all of our offensive assistants that know about the NFL game. Jake Peets does a great job of coordinating a lot of what we're doing on offense. So, yeah, I mean, he's coming from college, but I think, I'm kind of on the record here with the type of thinking that Ryan does and how he includes the rest of the staff to how they operate, how we handle game management. I mean, there's plenty of times where we're working together on this thing. It just so happens, I'm not in there when we're installing offensive plays because defensively, we have our job to do as well.
So that was Mike Macdonald talking about Ryan Grubb and responding to my kind of characterization of putting an offensive play caller in charge of the offense. And I'd asked Mike Macdonald a bunch of questions to that point throughout training camp, every day of training camp. Got to kind of get a feel for how he responds to certain questions that he likes, questions that he doesn't. Listening to it now and watching him now, I wouldn't think twice about it. I'd kind of be like, oh, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal. At the time, I could tell that the question really bothered him. He did not like the idea of Ryan Grubb being in charge or being perceived to be in charge of the offense. And he then quickly did what he did a lot of the rest of the year. He quickly deflected and moved away from Ryan Grubb to talk about the rest of the staff. He talked about Leslie Frazier spending time with Ryan Grubb and helping him out. He talked about Jake Peets. Now, Jake Peets is a name to keep in mind because this is absolutely a candidate for offensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks. I'll come back to that in just a second, but he talked about Jake Peets and how he's coordinating. And he talked about how he's on record of, how Ryan Grubb involves everybody in the room and pulls people together, and how he's not in the room for game planning because he's got to get the defense ready. Well, I think that the implications there very early on, and that was the first time I got this pretty strong feel from Mike Macdonald, was he wasn't ready to hand the keys over to Ryan Grubb. He had real questions still. And I would go as far as to say my interpretation of his answer at the time was he does not love the idea of people over providing too much credit to Ryan Grubb. That he wanted to slow everyone's roll about credit going to Ryan Grubb. And he wanted to make sure that people knew about a lot of the other folks in that room. Now, Mike Macdonald happens to be somebody who also likes to spread credit for sure. And so that's a natural tendency. But I'm telling you, this stood out. This stood out all the way back after week 2. Next thing I'm going to play for you is a clip much later in the season. This came after the Seahawks lost to Green Bay. This was not in the post game. This was the Monday after. And I asked Mike Macdonald, hey, you've talked about wanting to commit to the run. By the way, I will get to those clips here in a second. Did you feel like, the reason you guys didn't run as much against Green Bay in this game was because the game got away from you? Or were there other reasons? Or do you feel like you could have run the ball more in this game? Here is what Mike Macdonald said in answer to that question. And I think I can show this to folks as well. All right, here we go. Here's Mike Macdonald responding to that question about why they didn't run the ball more often against Green Bay.
The game plan came out.
Well, we wanted to run it more going into the game for sure. And didn't get as many runs in as we thought, partially because of circumstance. But there are some opportunities in the game that we both felt like runs could have been better utilized, and you way to learn from those things. And but we're on the same page on how we're calling games and all that. But absolutely, we need to get our run game going.
So that was Mike Macdonald. He didn't exactly hang his OC out to dry, but he was pretty darn clear that he felt like there was opportunities to run in that game that they did not take. And that the implication was pretty clear in that answer that he wasn't happy about it. And it's not the first time. I have a bunch more clips I could play. I've tried to be selective. We have all off season to go through some of these. But you could go back a couple weeks to the Jets game. And when they had the first down at the 4-yard line, and they had 8 plays that they ran inside the 4-yard line. 5 of those plays were pass plays. 3 of those pass plays came from the 1-yard line, including the final one, which was a sack that lost them 16 yards from the 1-yard line. This is what I mean by there's philosophical differences. It doesn't mean Ryan Grubb's a bad OC, but given the choice, I would say there's really 2 primary places, maybe I'd say 3, that Ryan Grubb and Mike Macdonald see things differently. 1, short yardage. 3rd and short, 4th and short, goal to go. By the way, the Seahawks were the only team in the NFL that went 0 for 7. I didn't look, maybe yesterday things changed, but they were 0 for 7 with less than 2 yards to go, the goal to go from less than 2 yards. 7 tries, 7 passes, 0 for 7. Like, That point of view, that philosophy is very different than what Mike Macdonald wants to see. The other aspect that I think Mike Macdonald doesn't like is red zone in general. The red zone approach, there was not nearly enough run in the red zone from what I think Mike Macdonald wants to see. I don't have the sound queued up, but I've asked him about this, and red zone performance and red zone offense, from his perspective, is very centralized around the run. How good are you at running the football and how good are you in the red zone are part and parcel from a Mike Macdonald perspective. So I think that's another area where they were different. And then the third area that I'd say that was pretty different, I believe part of the reason Mike Macdonald wants to lean on the run was to control the clock and to control the football. The Seahawks turned the ball over time and again this year, made things harder on their defense, made things harder on their offense. And I think that is a big aspect of where he and Ryan Grubb just saw things differently. I've got some more sound to play for you. Before I do, I'm going to take a drink of water here. I'm going to encourage you to make sure, if you have not already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. Welcome to all my folks following and watching on TikTok. Great to have you guys with me. Hopefully you're able to hear some of the sounds I'm playing. Doing my best to kind of manage the multicam situation here, since TikTok does not allow me, excuse me, to stream directly to TikTok. So we do our best. Next thing I'm going to do here is play. I know there's a bunch of super chats. I'll get to those in a little bit. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to play some sound for you from Ryan Grubb. And this is a good indication of kind of where I would say, don't be so sure that Ryan Grubb wanted to come back, okay? Don't be so sure that Ryan Grubb wanted to come back. This is a question he was asked. This was December 5th. So this was after the Jets game, before the second Cardinals game, okay? To give you an idea of where this was. So they were winning, relatively speaking, but the offense was scuffling. They really struggled against the Jets. And he was asked, what's it like to play for a defensive head coach for the first time in his career? And here is Ryan Grubb's answer.
It is definitely a first for me there, and Coach Frazier and Mike are definitely defensive guys. So I think that it's just perspective, honestly. You know, you have to, at first you can, even way back to OTAs, I'd be like, wow, I would have liked to, run 20, 30 more plays in this situation and not been with the defense and things like that. So there's things that I think how they look at things. Sometimes I think defensively there's more of a holistic approach to it versus, sometimes offensive guys are just like run as many plays as you want or whatever you need to do, and you can focus more on that way. And I think there's give and take in both those situations. But certainly what I've appreciated about Mike is, his understanding of, how to win games, and that's what I think in the last few weeks we've really come together on that, if we need to hang on to the ball and take care of it and they're playing lights out, then we can do that. If we have to be explosive and try to go after people and play catch up, we can do that too, So I think marrying those things together and continue to learn that process has been valuable.
So a couple things stood out to me about that answer. I have a couple more clips to play from Ryan Grubb. Was Ryan Grubb's delivery, his interaction when he was answering questions, basically after the bye week, I would say, his demeanor just changed. The kind of, joy is too strong of a word, but he's a naturally kind of effusive, positive, energetic guy that seemed to be sapped out of him at that point. He seemed a little defeated, was the word I would use. And he's a professional. I have like a ton of respect for Ryan Grubb. I like Ryan Grubb a lot. I think he's going to be a great coach. I think there's going to be 100% chance that Seahawks fans are going to be like, I can't believe we let this guy go. He's so good. I really still believe very much in Ryan Grubb as a play caller, as an offensive coach, a coach in general. I just don't think this was the right fit for him. But in any event, I just think his demeanor changed. And so that stood out. But also hearing him talk about working for and with a defensive minded head coach, and even calling out Leslie Frazier as Mike's, secondhand man, who's also a defensive oriented coach, I think says a lot about there's philosophical kind of differences just even at that level, being a coaching staff that's coming at the game from a defensive point of view versus someone who's coming at it from an offensive point of view. And I asked in the same press conference, I asked a little bit later, and you'll hear this now, what's it like to work for a new head coach? He's worked with Kalen DeBoer for so many years. What's it like having someone that doesn't know you as well? And when the things go bad, you don't have that shared history. This is what Ryan Grubb said there.
To lean back on.
Yeah, that's good. I think that, you have to trust your decision making early on, and there's a reason I took this job and the trust that I have in Mike, and I think that that's a huge part of any relationship, right? Whether it's a working relationship or whatever, and certainly there's built up reps, so to speak, with a guy like Kalen when I was with him for a long time, and so when you hit those bumps in the road, they're easier to manage and get through. So certainly this season has provided a lot of growth opportunities for Mike and I, and I'm thankful for that. And I think the relationship has gotten stronger, and the understanding of what we're trying to get done as a team just continues to build. So it's been fun, honestly.
I'm sorry, Ryan. I don't think it's been fun. I didn't buy it then. I definitely don't buy it now. I appreciate and I respect the spin that he was trying to put on it. But I think you heard in that statement, he doesn't have the shared history with Mike Macdonald. And when there are bumps in the road, he can't just say, I know what I'm doing. Just trust me. He's having to prove himself while learning a new league, while learning a new head coach. That's his boss. There's a lot of new stuff to manage. And not to mention, when I brought this up at the time, it can't be easy for Ryan Grubb to know that one of the guys that might want his job is in the room with him. Jake Peetz, who knows what, I don't know Jake Peetz. I'm not saying that he did anything negative. Is there a chance that somebody who wants to be an OC in the NFL might be saying things to the head coach that weakens his confidence in the guy that currently has that job? He wouldn't be the first person to do it. It wouldn't even make him a bad person, but it's possible. It's possible. And to even know that that's possible, if you're Ryan Grubb, who's trying to make your way, it's just a much different situation than when you're with Kalen DeBoer, who someone could come and talk behind Ryan Grubb's back if they wanted to, and Kalen DeBoer would be like, who are you? Like, I've got this guy. We've been through battles together. I'm not going to hear any of that. With Mike Macdonald, things are different. Like, he doesn't have that relationship, and I think that played a role here. So that's another piece that I would that I'd bring up. I'm going to give you one more for Ryan Grubb in this same press conference. And this was a question about, what have you learned so far in the NFL? And the answer to this actually comes up a few different places, but let's play his answer so you can hear what I heard. And then I'll talk about why I think it matters. Here's Ryan Grubb again.
Oh, wow. There's tons of things. I think, finding ways to build your team around the guys you got are things that we've always been pretty good at. And I think that we've tried to, highlight those things and keep building around the guys that we have and the players we have. But as far as like learning processes, I think that, the coordinator families in the NFL and where guys come from and the different type of processes those, defensive families, so to speak, have. I think that's probably one of the biggest things because everybody kind of comes from certain trees, and so certainly evaluating some of those things and seeing what type of things people draw back to is unique to the NFL.
So I think the key thing here from what Ryan Grubb was saying was talking about personnel and pointing to personnel. I could play you a bunch of clips to when you ask him questions about what he's learned, about things that, have gone well or not gone well, or when you're trying to do this, why is it working or not? He brings up personnel a lot. And the implication my takeaway from that at the time and now is that he felt like he was restricted and he was impacted by the personnel that he had to work with on this team. And I think for folks that are saying, hey, this isn't fair what happened to Ryan Grubb, that's where you start. I will tell you, I've had this debate with a lot of my co-hosts and other folks that work with me on Hawk Blogger. And while I expected Ryan Grubb to be let go after this season and talked about that for months, I am not in the category of thinking that he is bad at his job. There's some that are. And part of what I would say is if you look at the worst offensive lines in the NFL, the bottom 5, the bottom 10, none of them are good offenses. The only other one that I would say is a good offense is the Bengals. And I got to tell you, the Seahawks, I like Geno Smith. He's not Joe Burrow, and no one's going to mistake him for Joe Burrow. I like DK Metcalf and JSN. Those two guys are not Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and no one's going to mistake them for that. So I don't think the Bengals are a good proof point that you can be a great offense with a bad offensive line. I think the reality is when you've got an offensive line that the Seahawks do, almost anybody would have come here and struggled. And I would even say, I don't know this to be true, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Seahawks offense might have actually scored fewer points, had fewer yards, been worse overall if Mike Macdonald had the offensive coordinator that he wanted in year one. If they really tried to be a run-oriented team in year one, control the ball, pass less often, I'm not convinced the Seahawks team would have been that much better. In fact, the offense might have been worse because I do think the personnel, they played 4 different right tackles, and for a lot of the year, they were playing their 4th string, 6th round rookie right tackle. They played 3 different right guards, and they were rotating right guards for most of the season. They had their center retire in the middle of the year. These are not normal things. And so while I still understand the decision, I also understand where Ryan Grubb's here saying, you know what? Personnel, baby, it matters. And it certainly does. So I want to play another couple clips for you guys, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit. I'll look at super chats. We'll talk a little bit more. But this next clip is from Ryan Grubb as well. And this was a question I asked him. You're going to hear the end of the question here in a second, where I basically asked him, and I phrased it as, talk about the paradox of how do you call run plays when the run game isn't working, when you know you kind of need to run the ball to be able to get good at run plays. And you'll hear him kind of laugh at the idea, basically acknowledging that this is a challenge. Here's Ryan Grubb's response.
Working that well, but you need to run in order to get better at it?
Oh, I think there certainly is that can be a tough proposition at times. I think you're playing the whole game into account, meaning, where's the clock at? What's the score? How's the defense playing? How much time do we have to use? And then there's a point in time where, certainly some games early in the year where we got behind and we had to let the pass game take over a little bit. And those are the times that you get excited thinking about what the offense can do, and you can create some of that balance, and teams don't know what's about to happen. So it's just a management every series, honestly. You're really evaluating exactly where you're at, what's going on with the time of possession, things like that. And at the same time, knowing calls you've made and things that you want to try to change in the narrative of the game. So there's certainly a spirit of that is a chess match that that you love, that's really fun and sometimes really frustrating.
So what I want you to pay attention to is how much of an answer Ryan Grubb gave on that question. I asked Mike Macdonald, same week, similar question. You're going to hear him also laugh because he's going to understand. I think this is, if you're going to walk away with one thing from this show, the differences in how these two men answered essentially the same question, I think tells it all. This is Mike Macdonald responding to me saying, hey, chicken and the egg, do you have to run the ball in order to be good at it, to commit to it, or do you have to commit to it in order to be good at it?
Curious, like the chicken and egg situation of, do you have to commit to running the ball to get good at it, or do you have to get good at it to commit to running the ball?
I think you got to commit to it. Yeah, you're going to get what you emphasize. So, yeah, I think that one's pretty straightforward.
That's it. That's his whole answer. Contrast that with what I just played from Ryan Grubb. Like, Ryan Grubb's answer is great. It makes sense. He talked about the nuances of game script, score, personnel came up a little bit, all sorts of things, chess match. And they're all like valid things to bring up. But all of those things amounted to, well, it's kind of complex. It depends. It depends. For Mike Macdonald, it doesn't depend. You run the ball. You commit to running the ball. You get what you emphasize. And I think that if you look at Ryan Grubb, he just emphasized different things than what Mike Macdonald wanted to be emphasized. And that's why he no longer works for Mike Macdonald. So that, to me, those are some of the clips to me that I think really tell the story of why these two guys were just not going to be a good match. And if you're wondering, like, well, then how did this happen in the first place? Again, they didn't have a lot of guys to choose from. Remember, they wanted to talk to Mike Kafka, who they had interviewed for the head coach position. They wanted to talk to him about the OC position. He was blocked. Brian Daboll did not let him talk to them about the OC position. I think they had interest in some other guys. There was a story that Frank Smith of the Dolphins turned down the job, regretted it. Don't know if that's true or that's not. But I think there was very few options. I think Ryan Grubb had a great pedigree. I think John Schneider thought highly of him. And I would bet, Ryan Grubb's a very likable guy. I bet they had a good conversation, a good meeting, mutual respect, and they thought, like, let's give it a shot. I think it was a good bet. And it just didn't work out. I think they both found out enough about each other during this process that they both would have probably said, hey, nah, like, we're better off not together. And I don't hold any judgment about either one of them for that decision or that reality. Let's get to some of these super chats. We got one here from Gary Simonson who says, this feels unfair to Grubb. He didn't get enough time. And Gary, I get it. I think you're going to be mimicking what a lot of people are going to feel. I'll just say what I said at the beginning, which is this isn't about whether or not Ryan Grubb could be a good OC or whether he'd be better. This isn't a performance-based decision. Ryan Grubb is not here because it was a philosophical difference. Ryan Grubb had so many chances to kind of change his philosophy on how to attack the defenses with the run, how to incorporate more play action, to do things that Mike Macdonald clearly believed were important. He didn't do them. So in that sense, either you say, good job, Ryan Grubb. Kudos to you for sticking to your guns and your philosophy and not changing just to match your head coach's desires. But also, if it doesn't work, if you're not one of the best offenses in the league, don't expect to be rewarded for kind of going off script and doing something that does not match what your coach wants, what your head coach wants. Cameron asks, any early offensive coordinator predictions? Well, I mean, the obvious one candidate for sure, like I have zero doubt about this, is Jake Peetz. Jake Peetz is a guy that the Seahawks were able to pry away from the Rams. Sean McVay did not want Jake Peetz to leave. They were able to convince Jake Peetz to come, partially because part of the reason people leave Sean McVay's staff is because Sean McVay is the play caller. So if they want to grow into a true OC, that's not necessarily the place they're going to get to do it. They have to leave. And so I think Jake Peetz sees that. Jake Peetz has been an OC before. He's different than Shane Waldron. Shane Waldron had never called plays before he came to Seattle. Jake Peetz has. He called them at LSU. And let me remember his other, I'll pull this up real quick. He also was the OC at, well, he worked at Alabama, but he was just an offensive analyst. So he was the OC at LSU. That was the place where he called plays. So he has had that experience. That was back in 2021. Then he was an offensive assistant for the Rams in 2022, a pass game specialist in 2023, and he was the pass game coordinator this year. And you heard Mike Macdonald reference him, earlier in the sound that I was playing. So I think Jake Peetz is absolutely going to be a candidate. The other benefit to Jake Peetz is Mike Macdonald doesn't have to guess. Am I going to get along with this guy? Can I trust this guy? Do I know how he thinks? Does he know the players? Will he be able to have a strong idea of what to do? Will he be able to hit the ground running? Jake Peetz has a lot of advantages that are built in. That does not mean he's going to get the job, but he's 100% going to be one of the candidates. Zero doubt about that. And who knows? He might be the next Liam Cohen or the next, LaFleur, or pick your favorite Sean McVay disciple. Peetz might be that guy. And if he's come from that kind of background, get a decent idea of where his footing is from an offensive play caller perspective that, absolutely is about marrying the run and the pass. As far as other OCs, I think Doug Peterson is an interesting name to talk to. Former head coach, Washington State ties, state of Washington ties. Definitely has history as a run-oriented play caller, has won a Super Bowl. You can't have too many of those guys on your staff. And I think having a head coach on the other side of the ball could be really helpful for a still young, still developing head coach in Mike Macdonald. So I think Doug Peterson's an interesting name. I think there's certainly some other guys to keep an eye on. We'll see about Frank Smith in Miami, whether or not he becomes a name to watch. I think that oh my gosh, what is his name? Minnesota Vikings, Josh McCown, former quarterback, being actually interviewed for head coaching jobs. I don't think he's going to get a head coaching job. I think people are just checking him out as a potential OC. I think Josh McCown is a really interesting name that I like. I loved him as a player. He was smart. He was tough. I love quarterbacks, former quarterbacks as OCs who can see the game through the quarterback's eyes, find ways to make it easier for them. I think he's a star in the making potentially. So I think Josh McCown's a really interesting and exciting name. And we'll go from there. I don't think it's going to be a college one. I think it's going to be someone who's had experience in the NFL. I think it's going to be somebody who has proven that they know how to marry the run and the pass. Dogzilla Monster. Okay, so what is Mac's philosophy for offense? Well, I think if you listen, I'll do another show where I'll probably splice together a bunch of clips from Macdonald about this in the past year. But it is going to be a physical style of offense. It is going to be one where running the football is a core part of it. It's going to be about controlling the football. What I haven't heard as much from him about is explosives. I would bet that he still believes explosives are pretty important. I would bet that his offensive philosophy is pretty close to Pete Carroll's offensive philosophy. You know, run to control the ball, to limit turnovers, and to take some pressure off your quarterback, and then hunt for explosives in the passing game. I think he would marry it with play action. I think he believes play action can be a big part of your explosive repertoire on offense. And we'll find out. But that's, I mean, generally speaking, I think at a high level, that's what I think he believes. One of the things that's interesting is I think a lot of people think that the shotgun orientation of this offense was a Ryan Grubb thing. I think Mike Macdonald might be a believer in shotgun-oriented offenses. Going to be fun to kind of find that out with this next hire. But the way he spoke about it when I talked to him or we had interviews, he talked about the gun offense as theirs in a way that felt like truly it was part of his perspective, not just something that Ryan Grubb was kind of pushing on them. So we'll find out about that. But I think that might be part of it as well. We have got troublemaker Josh Cashman using his 9-month membership, man. Josh has been around since the beginning, OG, to send us a lot of Evan pie face emojis available for members if you want. So thanks for that. Got some comments here on TikTok. They gave him something like a bottom 3 offensive line and expected him to do something with it. I don't think that they did expect. I think they expected him to do something with it, but I don't think that's why he's not here. How do you think the OC change is going to impact Geno and DK staying or being successful? That's a great question. And I think that part of it's going to depend on who they bring in as the OC. I think the OC is going to have some say in what happens with Geno Smith and with DK Metcalf. I think Mike Macdonald is not particularly effusive. The guys that his face lights up when you bring up, Devin Witherspoon and DK Metcalf. So whatever your opinions are of DK Metcalf, whatever you feel, I'm just sharing what I've seen. He loves DK Metcalf. He loves what he brings. He thinks he is a massive difference maker. And so I don't know that DK Metcalf's going anywhere. For people that are maybe arguing he should be. Another question we got here. This one's from Johnny. Says, I wanted Grubb another year, but if they did not see eye to eye, this needed to happen. And you know what? I think that's exactly right. I think that's right. You do not want your team to have kind of an internal friction going on and just how to win football. It's hard enough to win football games when everyone's on the same page. If you're starting from a place of misalignment, you are just climbing uphill and you're putting players through hell, to be totally honest. I can feel my throat is ready for me to stop doing this, so I might have to jump off here in a little bit. Let me get to a couple more super chats. Troy in the Philippines says, it'll be interesting to see who Mike Macdonald picks as the next OC. 100% agree. A comment here from Grandma's Boy. I do enjoy Mike Macdonald's decisiveness on wanting to improve immediately. I agree. I think that that's a good thing to take away from this, is that Mike Macdonald's not going to get precious with this. I think it's a good thing to take away from John Schneider as well. John Schneider could have said, hey, this might kind of look bad for me. If people are associating Ryan Grubb with me and you fire him after 1 year, he didn't stand in the way. He let it happen. So I give credit to John Schneider as well for giving his head coaching hire the authority to make this decision. Next super chat. This comes from Avery Aguirre, who's been a member for 4 months. Thank you so much for being a member. Says, Is there any OC that will be available that we should be excited about? Firing Grubb means they aren't messing around. The future is bright. Go Hawks. Well, just talked about some OCs. I think we'll get more news soon. Brian Dable was another name that could have been on the list. He's not. Brian Callahan for the Titans could have been on the list, but he's not. Shane Steichen for the Colts could have been on the list, but he's not. So, yeah, I think we'll find out if some other names surface, but next few days, I think this will start to evolve for sure. I think we'll get some names pretty quickly. Carter Morgan says, one-dimensional offense equals pressures by default. Yeah, this is a thing. When the Seahawks they threw the ball so much this year, and they did not have the offensive line to do it. Even if you feel bad for Ryan Grubb, hey, they didn't give him an offensive line. You can't win with a bottom 3, bottom 5 offensive line. I agree. But you also can't throw the ball 45 times a game with a bottom 5 offensive line. Like, Ryan Grubb could have managed the game differently, and he chose not to. And I think that did contribute to higher turnover rates than we've seen in the past from guys like Geno Smith. So, you do have to take some responsibility as Ryan Grubb for why. Dogzilla says, could we please get an OC who can play right guard? Wouldn't that be nice if we could double up? I do not think that that's in the cards, but I understand and appreciate the intent. Eric Peterson. I have no idea how much money you just super chatted because I think it's in yen. Says, thanks, Brian. I live in Japan, and the Seahawks in general and this channel specifically make me feel a bit more connected to my hometown. If you're ever in Tokyo, sushi's on me. Well, Eric, thank you so much. I really appreciate the super chat. I've been to Tokyo multiple times. I love Tokyo. I love some ramen. Love me some ramen. The best steak in my life I had in Tokyo. I'm not a seafood guy, so sushi's probably a little lost on me. I will try it. I will eat it, but it's like people like fall and fawn over sushi. I'm kind of like, not my thing, but I really appreciate it. Would love to get some beer and some steak and some ramen. All that stuff sounds good to me. Definitely a beautiful, beautiful place to live. Michael Hyde says, so McVay let an offensive assistant call the offense in the last game. Considering they almost beat us and McVay will be calling the Rams offense for like 10 more years, we should hire him as the OC. I think that's a fine name to throw on the list. Mike LaFleur, who I believe is Matt LaFleur's brother. He did call plays for the Rams yesterday. He is available. Now, I think that this might be a little bit of a nuance, but I think he's available to interview as an OC because he does not have play calling responsibility. There's a nuance to NFL assistant coach contracts where it is considered you're not allowed to interview for a lateral move. But if you're a defensive coordinator or an offensive coordinator that does not have play calling responsibilities, that is not considered a lateral move to apply for a position or interview for a position where you would have play calling responsibilities. So like Aden Dirty for the Seahawks could be plucked by another team to be their defensive coordinator because he doesn't call the plays for the Seahawks right now. Mike Macdonald does. Similarly, I think Mike LaFleur is the same boat. The fact that he called plays in this game, I don't think negates that, but we'll see. So he could be another name to keep an eye on. I think that's a totally reasonable name. Sam Brown, whoever we hire for OC, let's make sure they have a run coordinator this time. I've seen a lot of people bring this up. Look, the Seahawks had Tom Cable as a run game coordinator and Darrell Bevell was the pass game coordinator. And from what I heard inside that locker room, that was problematic at times. Like they didn't talk to each other. They didn't coordinate amongst each other that well. It made things harder in some ways. Granted, it ended up working, but I'm not so sure that structure is the answer or having specific roles is the answer. I think if you get the right person who has the right philosophy on how to run their offense and they're not guessing, they're not learning, they just kind of know how they want to run their offense and how it should fit, I don't know that you need a run game coordinator and a pass game coordinator and all that stuff. I think you just need whatever that person needs to be successful. And so I'm not particularly hung up on that. I know some people definitely share Sam's perspective. Russell, welcome. Russell Solberg's a new member. Welcome to the channel. It's great to have you. And he says, should have done this months ago to extend support for your adventure. Here's a little support for your off-season work. A very generous super chat from Russell. Thank you so much for that super chat. Really, really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the off-season. I actually talked to John Schneider today. I was like, I need some tips on Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. And he told me I'm going to love it down there, scouting the guys, talking to coaches and scouts and all that kind of stuff. So I'm looking forward to that. I can only do that with the support I get from all of you. So really appreciate it. If you haven't gone over to patreon.com/hawkblogger, great time to do it right now. Join up the off season. A lot of great stuff. I have literally a full hour of exit interviews with, oh my gosh, Satawa Lamea, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, Tyrese Knight, Jarek Reed. There's so many guys I talked to about their off-season plans. And, Christian Haynes. I talked to all these guys in the locker room earlier today. That's only available to patrons. So once I get that cut up and edited, I will post it up at patreon.com/hawkblogger. That's a place where you can get that. I'm going to have conversations at the Senior Bowl. Those will be only available to people at patreon.com/hawkblogger. You can follow my podcast feed on Spotify, the patron podcast feed. You can follow it on Spotify. A lot of times I will unlock episodes for the public. So you don't have to be a patron to hear some of those. And you can also get a feel for kind of what you get if you are a patron. So head over to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up there. I'd also really encourage you, if you haven't already, head on over to jkboots.com. Use code hawkblogger. It will get you 10% off. Chance to get the best pair of boots you're ever going to own. I love my JK boots. Based in Washington, Spokane, family owned, just amazing boots that'll probably last me my whole life. But you can get work boots, you can get boots for jeans, you can get cowboy boots, all the stuff. Amazing handmade, 6 to 8 weeks for them to make these. And if you use code HawkBlogger, you get 10% off. You also get a chance to get a Seahawks themed pair of boots that will be made for your feet only. And you'll be the only person to have it. I'm going to be picking who gets those very soon. Not to mention that we've already given away 3 pairs of boots to the Wildland Firefighters Foundation to help Northwest Forest firefighters stay safe as they protect our Northwest forests from fire. So appreciate that. Question on TikTok, do we think that the Seahawks are going to keep Geno? I do. I do think the Seahawks are going to keep Geno, but I'm certainly interested to find out, his comment yesterday, Geno, of like, this team's going well with or without me, is interesting. I think he knows that he did not have the season that makes his future certain. And we'll just find out how that evolves. But that's going to be one of many stories this offseason that we will track. Got another super chat here from Ali. Says, whoever gifted, thank you. And thanks for all the work you put in this season. So yes, if you are someone who's getting one of these free these free memberships like Ali did, love it. He's giving back. He's paying it forward with a super chat. You can pay it forward by giving away memberships to other people and growing our family and our community here on Hawk Blogger, Real Hawk Talk, all the stuff. Keep an eye on hawkblogger.com as well. I'll have more content there for you soon. But until then, I'm going to wrap this up. Appreciate all of you, all the thousands of you that are tuning in for this. We're going to have so much fun this offseason, so much to talk about. As long as my voice holds up, we will keep talking. I'll be back with you tomorrow morning for Hawk Blogger Mornings. We will continue the chat there. And a special congratulations to Jeff Simmons, my good friend, on becoming a father. So congratulations to you, Jeff. Love you, man, and hope you and your lovely wife are doing well if you're listening. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your Monday. It's just Monday. Wild. All right. That's it.